All right, hey everybody. It's 7. You want to start up? We've got, who do we got here? Everyone, I believe, is here except George. He's excused for a family death in the family. I've got Nick Ward-Willis. Oh my gosh, I've got our building inspector. Hey, Bruce. Do we have someone online?
Hi, Paloma's online.
Hey, Paloma. All right, and
Hi.
George, welcome.
Hey, George.
We were about to sell your seat.
Last one here should get.
Okay. And you said Drew may also be here?
Yes, yep, Drew will be joining us to discuss the leaf blower.
Okay.
If not, then
All right, so first item we've got, the workshop is electrification, and I guess Nick and Bruce, you're going to talk?
correct, right. I'm going to give you an update based upon our conversation with NYSERDA, and Bruce is here just to answer any questions and just talk about the implementation of the law and how that would be accomplished and his thoughts on the law in general and to answer some questions from the council. So the council may recall, as we've been discussing this matter, we've been looking at what the state has been doing, and we had reached out to NYSERDA to get their thoughts on the city's proposed local law. We had not been successful. They had not gone back to us in a timely fashion, and then the administrator's office reached out, and we were able to get some traction, and we had a call with the mayor, myself, and the administrator last Monday. And it was a good conversation to project managers for NYSERDA, and they had their general counsel on the line. And as we got into the conversation, it became evident why they were reluctant to speak with the attorney's office. It was because they have a policy of not really speaking on issues when there is pending legislation proposed. The governor's budget included proposed electrification legislation, so they were reluctant to comment on our law, while at the same time they were proposing that legislation within the governor's budget. They, however, did, with saying all that, they did then engage in a discussion with us. Their council made sure they stayed within their boundary lines, and it was probably a good 45, 50-minute conversation where they provided us with some feedback as to the availability of the technology, availability of the workforce, walked us through some of the parameters of the governor's proposed legislation. And just to put it in context, we have the city's proposed local law. The Senate and Assembly have an all-electric act that had been proposed in the prior session. It's been reintroduced for the 2023-2024 session. And then the governor has within her budget additional legislation that is proposed that is a little different and more comprehensive than the Senate and Assembly legislation. And the governor's hope would be that as they're negotiating the budget, legislative proposals contained within her budget message and within her 500-page budget legislation would be enacted at that time. So the state budget's required to be adopted by April 1st. In more recent times, they've actually met that deadline. So if the governor is able to negotiate and reach agreement with the legislative bodies, then the governor's proposed legislation would be adopted as part of the budget bill. If not, then it would go to the Senate and the Assembly bill, and that would then be debated until they go out of session in June, but it could then continue on for another year. We don't have a sense as to the receptivity within the Assembly and the Senate to the governor's proposed legislation. They did not elaborate upon that, but we do know it's sort of the goal of the governor and the Climate Action Council to implement the zero emission goals. So I would expect that would have traction. I don't know if it has more traction than last year, but certainly I think the momentum is behind it. What came out in our discussions is that the technology is there, the workforce is there. The state is working, NYSERDA is working on a update to the Stretch Energy Code. They're also working on an update to go all electric called Stretch to Zero Code. There are 2 communities they are presently working with, Ithaca and Hastings, to sort of evaluate that, the Stretch to Zero.
I don't think it's Ithaca. I think it's Hastings and, what's the other one? Did you think it was Ithaca?
I thought it was Ithaca,
Oh,
too.
all right. Okay.
I had in my notes Ithaca.
All right.
And the, right now they are working on sort of policy initiatives and looking at what the goals and purpose of that would be, drafting the law, probably not going to be ready for Hastings or Ithaca until the end of this year. And then if they think it's has good reviews and is able to be used, they would then roll that out as a potential stretch to zero towards the end of 2024 that other municipalities could consider adopting. They noted that Beacon's legislation, they're not aware of any other community that is considering it. They are noted, as we've noted, that the city and town of Ithaca have adopted a program a lot more different and comprehensive and burdensome, I think, than one we're proposing. And they noted that in our drafting, we have flexibility. The state law provides flexibility. They pointed out to the governor's budget bill. They pointed out to the implementation that there's flexibility as to whether you do it, roll it out all at once or roll it out with residential and commercial staging, is similar to what the governor has done. What they stressed to us was that in drafting their law, they were trying not to achieve 100%, but achieve as close to 100% as possible in terms of implementing it. And they also noted that there were certain uses that were, I say, problematic, ones that were not as readily identifiable and resolvable at this time. And they have, in their proposed legislation, exemptions. And they had suggested that we consider those exemptions, and their exemptions are similar to the ones we've discussed. The first one is for generation of emergency backup power, right, your generators. The next one is in a manufactured home as defined in subdivision 7 of section 601 of the executive law. Manufactured homes, I think that's a limited exception. And then the third one was one which reads, in a building or part of a building that is used as a manufacturing facility, commercial food establishment, laboratory, laundromat, hospital, other medical facility, critical infrastructure such as backup power for wastewater treatment facilities or crematoriums. And then those are the only exceptions they had. And they had suggested that those exceptions sort of, they thought was accepting and prudent within the industry and where the technology was. It allowed it to sort of get buy-in from the regulated community. And then they noted that there's an exception to the exception that requires where the prohibition on fossil fuel equipment and building system is not feasible, and the exemptions I just discussed, that require the area of service within the new building where the fossil fuel equipment is being installed be electrification ready, so that in the future it could then be converted. So you would allow the fossil fuel equipment in like a laundromat, but you would make sure if a new laundromat is coming in that it's the building to be electrified at some point in the future, so that you're still able to implement the state's goal in the future. Because as you may recall, this is doesn't do with existing establishment, we're talking about new, it's not requiring retrofitting. The Governor's Climate Act does talk about retrofitting a decade or so down the line. One of the things they also spoke about is that they say the state has not addressed the issue of gut rehabilitation. They said that's, it's not where they were focused on. They didn't think that was a significant portion, so it wasn't an area they were focused on in their law. We pointed out that in Beacon, right, you have a limited vacant land, so while you may have new construction, some of the, quote, new construction is rehabilitation of existing buildings going from industrial to residential, and that's why we had that language. And we had modeled that language after the town of Ithaca, who had a city of Ithaca. There's a city in the town, they both actually have similar laws. So we had modeled rehabilitation after city of Ithaca. They thought the language we had proposed made sense. They didn't ever offer any comments on it. So their recommendation was that we follow the state's exemptions and that we had flexibility in the implementation, and they said the gut rehab made sense, but really deferred that was a local issue. And I believe those were the highlights. Chris, anything I forgot?
Well, just the context. They were very positive about what we were doing. They remembered that Beacon was either the first or one of the first to adopt the stretch code. The mayor expressed interest in going to the stretch to zero when they opened that up again, and we said, essentially what we're proposing is that, how is that different from stretch to zero? And they said it's really not. Effectively what you're doing is stretch to zero. And they said that if we were to join that program, we would get technical assistance. So that would be helpful.
Chris, what does technical assistance mean? What do you mean by that?
I think with respect to questions that the building department may have when a developer comes in and says it's not practical, or how do I do this? We haven't thought about this technology won't fit in this area, so how do you address it? So it's both advice and assistance for the building department, but also for the development community, should there be questions about how you go about complying with the law.
Yeah, my understanding was that if you deal with the exemptions that they've listed, that you can kind of push this forward, but the information that you need are things like what incentives are available and at what time, right? Because if we move faster than the state, we're going to have to be able to either justify that or figure out, what are the incentives that will make it work, right?
Right.
It also seems like the exemptions are related in part to technology and how up-to-date technology is in terms of restaurant equipment and various other, crematoriums even. But
Yeah.
Yeah, and it gave me confidence that we're not going off the rails here. They basically said, the technical feasibility is there. If you do the exemptions, like the rest of it's there today.
And they did also mention to make sure it doesn't conflict with the building code requirements.
Right.
And part of this, because we're not preempted by the state, we're under the energy code, allowed to make these changes. And recall that the law is still subject to review by the New York State Building Codes Council. Once we adopt the law, we submit it up to Albany Department of State. They have 30 days to object to it or reject or request modifications. And Bruce did discuss with our office and feels comfortable based upon his review of the law and the understanding that there would not be a conflict between the building code and what's being proposed. I don't want to speak for you, but
I don't see there being a conflict. I think mostly what's being proposed is an enhancement to what's there. So as long as we're not lowering any standards below what's, currently required, there shouldn't be any issues.
good, thank you.
Did they talk at all about the timeline difference between commercial and residential implementation?
They did, and that's why I said they said we have flexibility. They said that if the state is going that way because we're rolling it out statewide, they need to make sure it's sort of rolled out and there's buy-in politically, if you will. They said, Beacon, if the technology is there, you have the flexibility to do so. They recognize that the exemptions provide you with that flexibility so that you could do residential and commercial now if you wish to do so. And they were keen on the exemptions as being suitable for buy-in.
So, sorry, just to follow up on what you're saying, that means that we could, rather than right now, we're pushing commercial as a whole back to a later date, we could instead consider more exemptions, but say, aside from those exemptions,
That's right.
everything that's new build, be it commercial or residential, is the end of this year.
That's correct, yes.
Right, and I think we have that because we've got the low rises, right? The high rises are put off, but the low rises with the exemptions, what I heard was what you just said, which is we would have some flexibility at that stage.
Yes. So this is on for a public hearing for next Monday.
So an approach I raised with regards to the commercial was that we not have exemptions, but as the technology evolves, that invites more businesses to move to Beacon. Was that discussed at all with NYSERDA, or was it only just about exemptions or no exemptions? Or just...
No, that approach did not get discussed, no.
But as far as I can tell, the exemptions were all industrial, but one. Did I miss that?
Well, the laundromats,
okay.
commercial kitchens, and I think, medical offices probably fall within that to some degree as well.
Okay.
But technology exists for laundromats, the heat pump dryers.
But the way they stressed it was that the way that we're laying it out with the exemptions, they said the stuff that's exempted is, quote, a small piece of the pie. They said if you're looking at greenhouse gas alone, that's a minor part. The biggest part is your thermal, your heating, and your hot water. And again, we were interested in this trade-off that if you do have exemptions that basically deal with the harder stuff, you can actually go easier with everything. You can go faster with everything. You know, because they were pretty clear that their decision about putting this out was about statewide issues, not
Right.
technical feasibility.
Right, and they also confirmed our percentage, which was, heat and hot water are 90%.
Correct.
So to clarify, the exemptions, let's say I'm opening up a restaurant, so I would fall under the exemption if we added that. Does that just mean my equipment, or does it mean my heating could also be exempt, and I could put in a gas heater? I just wanted to clarify.
It would be how we drafted the law. The state law does provide that where it's just for the fossil fuel portion of the exemption. So if there was, for example, it would just be the cooking equipment, but not necessarily the heating.
Okay, thank you. And that's to your point, Chris, that it's, the more we focus and target it, then the bigger issues could be addressed in this bill.
I mean, honestly, they said the commercial piece could flow much quicker than we were envisioning.
Right.
And again, I think they recommended we go with what the state has done, because they've kind of researched it. And then the only thing, they don't have any retrofit in their law at all. And that's where we borrowed from Ithaca, which kind of came up with a way to deal with that.
Right.
I'm certainly open to making an exemption for laundromats, because we have a bit of a laundromat crisis in Beacon. With the closing of the laundromat on Main Street, I think there's only one, maybe two left in town, and we have 50% of our 50% of our homes are rentals, and they may not all have washing and drying machines. So I think we want to do something to encourage laundromats to move to Beacon right now.
In that vein, I think I would, if we didn't have the exemption for restaurants or commercial kitchens, as a restaurant owner, I would feel I would have to recuse myself, because I do think it would limit the amount of restaurants that could feasibly open with these kind of restrictions on them. So
You're thinking like the pizza ovens and that kind of thing?
yeah, I think that you can't buy used ones, and a lot of places buy used equipment, and it's a huge investment. And so if you're going for the highest technology possible where that exists, I think you're going to pay a premium, and I think it's going to discourage restaurants from opening up.
But that doesn't, so that's thinking about that one restaurant owner, but that doesn't preclude somebody else from moving into that property, or another business from opening.
It just sets the bar a lot higher in terms of investment
Mhm.
in the business,
Right.
and it's already a risky business. So if I felt like this was going to decrease my competition as a restaurant owner, I think I would have to recuse myself, honestly.
Well, so I think we're being offered a very clear trade-off, which is we can move up the date, kind of the way that Molly described it, if we, take on the exemptions that the 800 pages of, evidence have said these are the appropriate ones. That makes a lot of sense to me. And it takes me out of the business of needing to know every piece of technology, right, as it applies to every, potential use, right? So the exemptions as a group kind of lead me to say, fine, why don't we move it all up to, for us in Beacon, to 2024, for both commercial and residential with those exemptions.
I think
that's
that
where we're
I'm
going, right?
open to this. Sorry, can you all hear me?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Paloma.
I think I'm open to this approach as long as I think I understood what Molly was saying, that we still required the heating and cooling systems in these commercial buildings to be electric, and the exemption to the exemption prohibition were not feasible, so that these commercial spaces could still be electrification ready, even if they're not done immediately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and help me out, Nick, is that correct, which is the cooking piece is viewed as distinct from the heating, right?
That is, yes. That's in the governor's proposed legislation, that is, yes.
Yeah, so that means by having the heating done, you take care of 90% of the greenhouse gases,
That's right, yep.
right? And we're only dealing with the rump now, right? And so again, I'm very willing to kind of say that's a good call, especially if we want to be a model. If we want to be a model to hundreds of other communities, we should hew pretty closely to what NYSERDA and is in the legislation, because all we're basically doing is creating a new stretch, right? And that's effectively how they describe what we're trying to do, right?
And they've done the research, they've done the studies in the backup to support that, so yeah, makes our law more defensible.
Okay.
I saw, so Amber and Aaron and I sat in a feedback session, or kind of like with NYSERDA when they were coming up with the Stretch to Zero goals. And the draft that we saw at that time, this was 2021, that draft that we saw was very complicated. What NYSERDA was putting forward with regards to electrification, and we were really struggling to understand it. I don't remember it today because I barely understood it when they were showing it to me. But
Right.
yeah, one topic that I'd like to get into, I heard mention of manufacturing as an exemption. Can we dig into that a little bit? Was that right? That was on the list of exemptions?
Yep, a building that is used as a manufacturing facility.
So do we want fossil fuel powered manufacturing in Beacon is really the question that I'm trying to, like, is that what we want here? Do we want green businesses, or do we want businesses that require fossil fuel to make their product? So, I'm a little iffy about opening the manufacturing door.
I want to agree with you, Dan, actually, because I think that if we remove that from an exemption, we're not saying that manufacturing can't happen here, but what we're saying is that we don't want to lock Beacon into generations of extra fossil fuels that are unnecessary for our community. But some of the technology is there, some of it's on its way, and I think it's a matter of, do we want to hold off until we can have businesses that aren't producing fossil fuel, or do we want to just tell our manufacturers that, like, it's okay, that's fine, you are the exception to the rule because you're bringing money into the community?
Well, so the one that comes to mind is Hudson Beach Glass.
Well, Hudson Beach Glass is already there. This is only impacting
So we're saying we
new
wouldn't
building.
want another place like Hudson Beach Glass?
They're one of a kind.
So,
That would be the impact to facilities like that, and also breweries.
yeah. So it just seems to me that if we want to go into a discussion of each individual item, we're basically trying to do stuff we don't know much about. We have very little industrial space. I would be shocked if we had that problem, and I would much rather have legislation that follows NYSERDA and lets us, if we've got an issue, I can assure you we can work our way around it other ways.
See, I'm seeing it a little different than you, Lee. I'm seeing it the other way, is if we say, if we don't have exceptions, I feel like we're coming out of the technology business, but because we're putting in exceptions, I'm starting to think about, like, oh, well, that's when we start talking about technology. That's when we start talking about glass blowing and laundry machines and, what was the other? Anyway, but we're talking about technology
Brewers.
when we talk about the exceptions. When we just say, when the technology evolves, your business is welcome here, means that we are out of the technology business altogether. We're not talking about the tech. The tech will mature when the tech matures, and then the businesses will come.
So now we're back to 2028, right? Because that was the trade-off, which was...
Why was that a trade-off?
I don't understand why that has to be a trade-off.
Oh, okay. Why don't we then just ban everything today?
No, just explain
Wait
the
a sec.
trade-off. That's
No,
So what we heard, or at least what Nick described, was that if you take on these exemptions, you're okay to do something sooner because those exemptions address the areas where the technology isn't there yet or the incentives aren't in place.
Correct, because that's why the commercial is broken out that way from residential. Otherwise, the state code would have just had one category and then the exemptions. But they broke down the commercial, recognizing that there were some commercial where the exemptions were appropriate because the technology wasn't there.
well,
And
that,
they didn't even have in 2028 industrial and manufacturing. I mean, that's well out into the 2030s, if it's in it at all. I mean, we asked them about that, and they said that's not ready to go. And I want to remind you, like, when Talix came to town and did like the Da Vinci horse, you're not going to do that with electric. Do you want a business like that come into town? I would. I mean, you have niche modern. What if they have facility space over there that has to be renovated? They have a building that has a dirt floor. If they do a build out and they come for a building permit, and now they're not allowed to do glass blowing, that is their business. You know what they're going to do is they're going to move out of Beacon. They'll go to South Carolina or North Carolina. I mean, we already had to work with the Empire State Development to keep some of these businesses here. What if Chemprene decides to do a different thing? I mean, we don't even know what we're doing on some of the commercial. To wade into industrial, again, you're going against what the state has set up as a parameter.
Well, this is also when we had this discussion with the state in terms of the industrial regulation, and the mayor mentioned the glass blowing, and that's when they said, you're really then starting to get diminishing returns because you're then impacting your largest impact is the residential and the commercial and your light and your heating and the cooling, not so much the industrial. So that's why they again recommended the exemptions.
And again, if you want this to be a model, do you want to really talk about what businesses you don't want to come to a municipality? That's stunning.
I mean, other municipalities can edit the law before they pass it.
Yeah, but I mean, again, you have something here that you're hitting most of the greenhouse gases. Like most of the greenhouse gases aren't in industrial in Beacon. We just don't have that room. We're not, coal mines and mills. But you do have some very high-end niche, like kind of niche businesses.
You have the ability to roll it out one way and then revisit it in a year or 2 years and evaluate where the technology is there and more experiences either from NYSERDA or from other communities. It's not an all or nothing.
Yeah, I mean, we've also spent the last few years talking about bringing jobs here instead of more residential, and I think if we wait for the technology to catch up and are willing to say, well, we're just going to wait until the technology is there before we're going to let these businesses in, I don't think that's wise, and I think I prefer the jobs, and relative to the impact, I think an exemption is appropriate at this time. I'd much rather take the jobs.
I want to circle back because I think we all have the same goal of just making this law as strong as possible, and I just think there needed to be some clarity as to why the exemptions and the timeline were mutually exclusive, and it seems like they are.
So I think, the logic that Lee explained was that the longer timeline is for the other technology to catch up.
Yeah.
So so Paloma suggested going along with the exemptions, doing 2024 for commercial, having heating and cooling not be exempted, right? And that the buildings have to be outfitted for electrification when the time comes and the technology evolves. Is that close to a consensus opinion at the table?
So I would just ask, is that consistent with what we were hearing?
It is, yes.
Yeah, because I think that was within the room that they said, if we do the exemptions, we can do.
You can go
so-
earlier.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm there with that.
I just have a question. Bruce, can we require them to have the setup for electric for new construction? How difficult is that?
Well, there would be, depending upon what they're looking to do, it could mean, service upgrades to the building, if it's an existing building. If it's something that they're building new today, they can plan for that ahead of time and upgrade their service large enough to accommodate the electric usage in the future. But it's a matter of, it depends on how you want to do it. Retrofitting is probably the most difficult right now because they would have to provide probably the upgrade in electrical
Right, this
service.
law just addresses
That'd be
new
an
construction.
additional, an additional cost to them. In terms of running, electrical conduits, let's say, or stuff like that, to a location from their service entrance, to where they would need equipment, I mean, that's a minimal cost to them. That could be done later on.
Okay.
But I think the biggest is the service, the electrical service to the building. That's going to be their biggest expense.
What was it again? Let's repeat the last part.
I think that the running of a new electrical service to the building to accommodate the future electrical use, that will be the biggest expense for them. Whether or not you're required to do that, currently during a renovation, or hold that off until the point where they actually do the upgrade to the electric heat.
But I think what I heard you say, and help me out, which is the running the conduit as if you're going to go all electric is not a major expense?
Yeah, it'd be a
when you're doing new
lesser expense.
construction.
And I'm thinking about it on a standpoint for, actually in the stretch code, there's a provision in the stretch code that you have to provide for an electric outlet in a residential garage for a car charger.
Mhm.
But you don't have to install a car charger, you just have to have the the electric there with some type of connection back to the house panel. So if they were to do during the renovation to provide conduit from the electric service area where it comes in to where the electrical, heating equipment's gonna go, I think that's a minimal cost.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that could be done when they switch over. It's gonna be the biggest part of the expense is gonna be bringing in that electrical service. If they have to get Central Hudson involved with, possibly upgrading the service cables coming in, obviously the service panel, the meter, possibly even have to, they may even have to install transformers, or a transformer, at the site, because they're gonna have to step up what's being delivered to them in order to produce what's needed. And that's more for the commercial aspect, not the, the residential. Residential is pretty straightforward.
If we go with Paloma's suggestion of having you look at the heat separate from the cooking equipment, how does that change your process operationally? Is that difficult to implement for your inspections?
No, it wouldn't be, because when they submit their plans, they would be told on the front side, if the law is passed in that manner, when they submit their plans to our office for review, then we turn around, we look at it, and then make sure that the equipment they're putting in for the heating and cooling is all electric. And then if they are running gas into the building for the cooking equipment, then it would be, just be localized to the kitchen area. So for us, for that portion of it, won't be a big problem.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Dan had a suggestion. I just wanted to hear what others thought about that one. We okay with that? So it would be, I think you said exemptions, but move everything up to 24.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled about the exemptions, but I'm also seeing that moving the timeline up 2 years saves us a lot more emissions than not doing these exemptions. I don't know if I agree that they're a trade-off, but I'm willing to be flexible.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah.
Right, so one date, January 1st, 2024, the exemptions as modeled in the state law. Non-cooling areas, or non-cooking areas rather, would need to be electric.
I think it's a little different than that, because it's not just about cooking, right? So it's really that the building's heating and cooling needs to be electric. Like, that's kind of that's the requirement.
Yes.
Yep.
And we may want to do the water,
Right.
the hot water, but whatever appliances they're using to create their product or manufacture, they can burn fossil fuels for that, and that's all.
Right.
So,
And then the fourth
So-
was then that, in that situation, that then be a build-out so that it can be used for electric later on. So we can take the state language, draft a revised local law, include it in the packet, so at least the public would see that on Monday's public hearing, and then you can further workshop that law. But I have the gist of what you're saying. We'll circulate that to the council as well.
yeah.
I'm going to go off the rails a little bit here and just say, can we just take crematoriums out? Because I don't think we want to invite crematoriums to Beacon. So do we have to have an exemption for crematoriums?
I think following the state, I mean, that's such a minor item, I think.
I know,
following the
but-
state is okay.
As the owner of a home where the crematorium moved, there are other crematoriums that exist in former Victorians that might want a similar path to somewhere different, so I
Planning
don't
a
want to at this
renovation?
point.
Going commercial.
Home office occupation?
This is Molly's retirement.
What I would say is, if we require the heat, I'm guessing that the incentives for the other items, which are small, as long as they're in place, the incentives are going to drive behavior,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? So I think we're going to get exactly what we want if we do this.
Yeah, I have this is a pie in the sky thing and not something for legislate, but if Stretch to Zero did open up again and we became it and we got technical expertise, I wonder if part of that could be helping businesses to think through options are. I assume NYSERDA had their pulse on what's coming up, so that maybe that's a partnership too that we could leverage again in the future if that works out.
Yeah, I think, this might be a little off topic, but since we're talking about the conversation with NYSERDA, I think an important next step after this law, if we pass it, would be a public information campaign about what is available to the public. We've had presentations, or we've had discussions at least, about some of the incentives available, free analysis of your home's, what do they call it, envelope?
The building envelope.
Yeah, and those kinds of things. I mean, if we could really push it hard, we could get off on the right foot with that other piece, which is the retrofit.
Bruce, do you think there's any need to clarify further the clause about electric ready? You know, how specific is that? Does it mean the power is available, the power just comes in, there's actually outlets, you know?
Yeah, I think the way, right now, the stretch code, how they address it is it has to be, you know, the actual, you know, electric either has to be run to that location, maybe not put the outlet in, but at least the electric, or or a conduit, you know, a conduit that's run back so that they could snake the wire through at a future date, without having to tear the house apart. That's more or less what that's their intent behind it. You know, if you want that option in there, I mean, just, you know, I think it would be an either or, either, you know, have the electric available at that location, or, you know, run conduit to the, you know, to the location. And I think that, you know, that would suffice. It would help them and kind of maybe push them along a little bit if needed.
Okay.
And we're really just talking about the difference between having a 110 and a 220 socket?
Yes.
Well,
Pretty
it could
much.
also be in three-phase.
And a lot of times it's not, well, it's that plus the size of the wiring too.
Sure.
Might go up for some reason, that type of thing. But it might be in its best interest, is, you know, they don't need to, because it's a minimal expense, maybe hold off on that portion of requiring to be ready. If it's new construction, I think, yes, they should be ready with at least the electric service coming into the, you know, onto the property. They should have enough to, you know, to be able to transition over.
Yeah, because it's hard to determine what either the technology or the equipment needs would be.
Correct, because as that evolves, I mean, in the beginning, it may be a very high usage, but then down the road, you know, with the technology getting better, it may, you know, reduce down. But you want to, you know, it's tough to gauge that. They could need twice the amount of power for some of these things, you know, on the commercial side.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we would require the conduit. Like we would require the piping to run the wires through to the correct location, right?
Yeah, if you felt it was needed to be, to, you know, to move them along with the process, especially if it's something where it's going to be needed to be, where it may need a commercial building, it may need to pass through multiple tenant spaces, or things like that, that might be a good idea to add it for those.
I don't know, I'm kind of inclined to at least have some kind of requirement of wiring, and that can be changed, that can be altered when the business decides to go all electric. But I kind of want to, like, I feel like just putting in a PVC pipe where they can put wires through isn't really, you know, kind of motivating for people to take the next step. I think, like, having the actual wall sockets there and knowing that you can do it at any time is kind of I think it makes it easier later on.
Well, so the state has a definition of electrification ready,
Oh,
which means the new building or portion thereof where fossil fuel equipment and building systems are allowed to be used, which contained electrical systems and designs. Yeah, it's not a healthy conversation.
Could we?
but NYSERDA does have one because it's in
Yeah.
the stretch code.
So can we see what that is?
Yes.
Because again, the sense I got from NYSERDA is, especially if we want, you know, Molly's suggestion of getting a lot of advice and help, and that would include programs like, you know, advertising the incentives, that the closer we are to kind of matching them, the more likely we were to kind of get into the program and get that help.
So,
And I think that makes us the leader, because, you know, we're saying we're going sooner, but we're not trying to redefine the wheel in a very special way, right? We're just following that plan, going sooner. If we get the incentives and the help in terms of advertising, I think that's really a model, so.
let me send the language from this legislation to Bruce, and also we'll talk about the language in the stretch code, and then come up with something that we can put in the code for Friday's packet.
Okay.
Just while Bruce is here, can I ask him a question about the stretch code? There's a requirement in the stretch code, I think, with the larger buildings, that a couple of the parking spots, if they have a garage, are outfitted with chargers, and then the others have to be, what we're describing now, they have to be charger ready. Have you been?
Since I came to Beacon, the stretch code is all new to me.
Uh-huh.
I haven't, to be honest, even working in the other municipality where I was, I didn't take any of the courses on the stretch code when they were given. So I'm still kind of learning my way through it.
Okay.
The residential, only because it's been, there's a lot of residential projects going on right now. Actually, one of the builders that just came to town, actually, it's the first project that they're doing under the stretch code, and one of their people, their development people in the office, actually started questioning me about different things, and I said, well, give me a few days, I got to look at this, and I'll get back to you. So, but we did work out, so that he could be in compliance with it. They just like keeping their numbers very tight, to give a quality product, but, without having to do more than they have to, that type of thing. So, but I've been learning it. The multifamily I really haven't dealt with yet.
Okay.
I can take a look at that, though. Cool. And I'll get an answer on it.
No, I mean, just want to make sure that it's, that it's on
Yeah.
everyone's radar in the building
It
department.
makes sense, though. I mean, that they, especially with the vehicles going forward, people do have to have provisions set up in place for that.
Okay. You ready?
I'm not sure where this
go
fits
ahead.
in, but I do have a few more questions for the group, if that's okay.
Sure.
I agree with Dan that an important next step is to make sure we have an information campaign around the incentive programs. But I did have a specific question out of the NYSERDA meeting, if you talked at all about when what the timeline might be for NYSERDA rolling out some of the IRA incentives. My understanding is that more of them will be rolling out potentially in June, but that I'm just curious if that topic came up.
I don't think they had a sense of when that was coming, right?
No.
Okay. Just want to pay a little bit of attention to the carrots that are out here. My other question for Bruce, and maybe this is something to ask you after you're a little more familiar with the stretch code, is that we're talking about the electrical load here, which is really important, obviously, but for energy efficiency, we also need to be talking about standards for insulation and ventilation. And so in order for most of these electric appliances to truly run most efficiently, structures have to be properly insulated. And I'm just curious if you have thoughts yet or a take on whether our current stretch code is adequate on that front.
It was more, I didn't quite hear it all that well. Your question was more about ventilation? Is that-
Insulation.
Insulation. Yeah, so the insulation values are pretty much adequate in the stretch code. The stretch code actually tries to push you to doing some alternate means. Instead of just putting insulation in between the cavities of the wall framing, they're actually pushing you closer to trying to put insulation in cavities and as well totally across the exterior of the building, basically giving you giving you a thermal break from the outside, which is very helpful in insulating the building. So you're not getting cold transmitting through the wood studs to some degree. So I think the stretch code is an adequate insulation value. I don't think there would be a need to address, the city at least trying to upgrade that.
Thank you. And are we going to be talking about major renovations? Is that our next topic?
No, I don't know if there's any discussion point, but certainly raise them. We'll do our best to answer. Our opinion is based upon discussions with NYSERDA and Ithaca and Bruce that the definition we have is the best approach. I don't know, Bruce, if you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think it's with at least from the the enforcement aspect, if they're going ahead and they're doing that level of renovation, doing, 3/4 of the building, and they are going to replace the heating equipment that's in there, it does make sense for them to go ahead and upgrade the heating equipment at the same time, because they're bringing up the insulation values within the building, in order for the electric heating equipment to work more efficiently. So I don't see there a problem with the way it's being proposed.
Well, the question that I have about this sentence, if you have it handy, I don't know, I can share it with you. It says, "and involves the replacement or new installation of heating or hot water system." I was inclined to strike that altogether, because if you're doing 75% of a building, you're basically doing the whole kit and caboodle except for the closets or something, right? I mean, if you're doing 75% of the building, I would say that just makes you eligible for this law.
Yes.
What do you think is the importance of having that?
I mean, the other issue comes in is it's, I guess, then you would need some type of a evaluation on it too, because if by upgrading the electric heating equipment, or forcing them to upgrade it, that puts an additional burden on them financially, because that heating equipment would have to be installed, and then possibly upgrading the electrical service at the same time. That may be something that they're not planning on doing.
So maybe what we could do instead is have a requirement that it's 75%, and then we require that the appliances within that 75% be replaced?
You do that, yes, or maybe even address it with the actual heating equipment itself. Most of the equipment that's out there, they all have manufacturers, tags on them with manufacturer dates on it, so they can identify when the unit was manufactured. If it's more than, if the unit's more than, let's say, 15 years old or 20 years old, they can replace that. They should include that in the renovation. But if somebody just put in a new high-efficiency wall-hung boiler, 2 years prior in their basement, it kind of, for them, they're really gonna squawk about having to, change everything over at that point.
I like that idea. I think it hits the nail on the head. I think it's more precise in what we're trying to accomplish. So what are you guys, Bruce and I are off here in the corner having a conversation.
What's the ithaca language? What's the ithaca language?
Well, it's one we have in our code, that any construction or renovation to an existing structure other than a repair addition where the work exceeds 75% and involves the replacement of new installation of the heating or hot water system.
All right, so I'm
It's
fine with
identical to
I'm
Ithaca.
fine with the Ithaca definition, right? No one else has gone anywhere near that far. NYSERDA was not there, so I'm okay with the Ithaca definition.
Well, I like the idea of end of use, or end of life of an appliance, so I'd like to be specific about that, because, they can decide whether or not they're replacing at the time of the building permit, and then after they renovate, 6 months later, can replace all the appliances if they want to. So I want to be specific about, if 15 years is the answer, or if there's an industry standard for end of life, I'd like to incorporate that into, replace all appliances that are at end of life within the 75%.
I agree, that makes sense.
Because I don't want people to replace appliances that they just bought either, but I also want to make sure that the appliances that need replacing are, and I don't think our current law does that.
So the current definition pertains just to the heating of a hot water system.
So what happens to stoves in the, I guess I've had a hard time understanding this sentence, honestly, and I've talked to multiple people, and we've had a hard time with it, so maybe if I'm missing it.
No, you're not missing it. It is just focused on the heating of a hot water system. That was deemed to be the trigger point, and that would then require electrification. If you weren't changing the heating of a hot water system, right, then the stove would still remain as gas as with the heating or hot water system.
All right. So I'm inclined to say that any appliance that's at end of life within the 75% would be replaced.
I'm not sure you'll be able to determine end of life on any equipment. I mean,
that I don't know.
A friend of mine is using a stove from 1950 right now. That's a wonderful stove. So he's...
Well, if it's given off gas, it's not.
Well, all stoves are, gas stoves are, but So I don't know. I don't know if you're going to be able to come up with a universal end of life.
Right. I don't know. I mean, right now, it's, the way that it's written is we're almost saying, promise us you won't replace your heat and water system, and we'll tell you that you don't have to electrify anything else, is how it reads to me. Right, like, because I can, if I say I'm renovating 75%, you ask me if I'm replacing the hot water and cooler system, and I know it's because I'm going to have to I'm going to say, no, I'm not. And then, do I need a building permit when I replace a heating or cooling system, or do I?
Yes, you do.
So if I were to replace my furnace or something, I need to come to you?
Yes, you'd have to take out a building permit or an HVAC permit, for that replacement.
And in your experience, Bruce, if they're doing a major renovation and sort of, would they be changing the heating and cooling system?
It's dependent upon the renovation itself. Again, like I said, I've been to some houses where the heating system is fairly new, so they don't replace it. They may make modifications to ductwork or piping or things like that, but they'll leave the heating unit there because it's something that can be changed out at a later date. So, and again, it usually falls into the time frame. How long has it been there? If it's something that's been there for 10 years, it's probably pretty efficient. With the way the federal government has ramped up the efficiency ratings of equipment. Something that's older, 25 years old, it's probably not quite as efficient as, it's definitely not as efficient as what's, being manufactured today. And at the same time, that would, maybe that would kick in for the, for an electric unit. But that would have to be, I guess that would have to be addressed. Because it's not like a one-for-one thing, You could take a gas furnace and switch that out, and let's say it cost you $5,000, to replace out the furnace. Now you go and you want to, change everything out to heat pumps. That might be, with an upgrade of the electrical service, the heat pumps, how they install them. It could be anywhere from, let's say $10,000 to $15,000. So, you're doubling the cost of replacement. And then that's a burden you have to put on the property owner. Something that they, most of the time these things happen, they're unexpected. So it's not like it's planned for. And that would be something to keep in the back of everybody's mind, because that's, if you're looking out for the residents, it could be, that could be a lot of a backlash on that you're causing me to have to spend a lot more money than I actually have to spend.
And I guess my question was, again, non-legal, but practical question I was just trying to understand. If someone is doing a 75% or more renovation of a structure, would they leave in place, as a practical matter, a 25-year-old heating system?
Yeah, most of the time they would.
Okay.
Especially if it's if it's somebody that's coming to, they buy up a house that's, that's pretty run down, they got it at a good price and they're flipping the house. Usually, for resale, they're going to replace everything. Those are, that's pretty much standard. Give them all new heating equipment, all new, brand new kitchens, brand new kitchen, brand new bathrooms. It's a good selling point for them.
Right.
So in those cases, it won't be a problem.
I'm sorry, so you said when they're doing that level of renovation, your expectation is they're putting everything in new?
For flipping.
Yes,
But-
most of the time.
Yeah.
Not going to say all the time, but most of the time, yes, because it's usually somebody that buys the house on on an investment, or they just bought it. Actually, there's a few that I'm surprised at the amount of work they've done. They actually do a 100% renovation. They take a very small house, put an addition on it, and try to make it much larger, but they put a lot of money into it. And even those people will put the investment in there, because they'll realize it's worth their while at that point. The people that are flipping the houses, and they'll do it because it's good for their resale. It's just the people that are doing the renovation, because now they borrowed money to invest in the home because they plan on staying here for another, 15 or 20 years. Those may be the people that you get the reluctance to do it, because it may be a much, maybe a good amount of money adding on to the project.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they have like a, $60,000, $70,000 budget, then adding another 5 or 10 is going
Yeah.
to feel like a really lot.
Right.
And they might be looking at, the footprint of the house, or they might be looking at different upgrades that don't involve kitchen.
Right, exactly.
But then another example is the bigger buildings where people are spending other people's money, banks' money, $10,000. I don't know, if I'm renovating 75% of 1 East Main, my guess is that $10,000 doesn't add a whole lot to the bill in the end. But the way that the law is written right now is, you can drive a truck through this loophole. We can identify it right here and now in this meeting, and it's very easy to exploit. So I think that that something needs to be tightened up here to make sure that we're.
What's the truck? Help me out, I didn't get it.
So I can renovate 75% of my building, tell everybody that I'm not going to renovate, I'm not going to replace my boiler or hot water or whatever, and then 6 months later, replace it with another gas one.
All right, so let's put in a criteria that says if you replace it within 5 years, you're out of compliance, or put a clause in there just for that. That didn't strike me as something that would occur, but I'm happy to put something in like that, right? Because if you think they're going to game it, we can deal with that part, right? Because I think it's more likely that we're dealing with, this is going to be mostly homes, it's going to be homeowners, and it's going to be people on a budget, sort of the way that Ren described it. And, if you're imposing additional cost on them, they may do it at a later date, they may do it when the incentives are in place, but it may be too much for their budget now. So I'd rather not impose a hardship on those situations, and I'm happy to write something to deal with the loophole that you've raised.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from Bruce, and I'll also mention that my hot water heater unexpectedly broke this weekend, and we've gone through a whole rigmarole of figuring out how to replace it, and we did decide to go with a hybrid heat pump electric hot water heater, and because of the incentives that currently exist through Central Hudson in New York State, separate from the IRA, it is a more expensive upfront cost, but we are going to save plenty of money in the long term. So just share that to also say that I feel for people who have unexpected appliance failures. But in terms of this policy, what I'm hearing is that because the installation of those types of appliances, boilers, furnaces, and hot water heaters do require a permit that goes through the building department, adding a stopgap like involves the replacement or new installation within a certain number of years, it's potentially the building department can flag that property and know that if one of those appliances is being installed within that time period, they would be flagged. Is that correct?
I didn't quite hear the whole thing. There's some.
So what if, let me make a suggestion, what if we simply said, if it's a substantial renovation and you're not replacing your heating system, that when you go to replace it, it has to go electric, period.
Yeah, I mean, it would be changing the law that when people are changing things out, then I
Right.
guess at this point, as long as they've done a substantial renovation, that type of thing, yes, we could probably, that could be written in.
You could flag it, though. I think that was Paloma's question.
Set up for that?
Yeah.
It would be, we have
You
to spend a little more time looking at it, but yes, we'd have to look at the property, look at the history, make sure that there is a permit in there from some, at some point in time that they did some type of substantial renovation.
Right, because you have to pull a permit to do
Yeah.
the new equipment.
Yep.
And they're gonna, if you look at the old permits, it should be sitting there, right?
Exactly, we'd have to just go back and look at everything that's in the.
So would that take care of it, Dan?
I'm not sure.
Right, it says, when you do go to replace it, if you don't replace it, it has to go electric.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I'm still of the opinion, it does, but I'm still of the opinion that when a major renovation is when someone's investing in a property, would be the time to encourage them to make the make the switch over. So I still feel like it's an open invitation for everybody to kind of say, well, I'm not replacing my appliances. So we're kind of encouraging people to keep old appliances. But I really want to hear from the public about this one. I'm not really sure. I'm not sure how to get this right. I don't know. I do like the recommendation, though. Yes.
Okay. Can we write that one in?
We can work with Bruce on something that
Right?
he can
So
handle, yes.
that means the and stays, but it also says that a subsequent replacement of the system will require an electric one. Right? Which, it should be an encouragement to just do it then, right?
That's right, yeah.
Unless you really don't have the dough, because it's going to be more expensive later. But I think that leaves the person the right incentive without requiring it when we don't know what their budgets are.
My other question is where the 75% number came from. I think I heard it came from the Ithaca law, but in looking at other definitions of major renovation within the building code, 50% seemed like the threshold.
Well, 50%, if you're looking at the building, more or less the existing building code, which more addresses commercial buildings, I believe. And when you do I believe if you're referring to like level 3 alterations in the existing building code, that kicks in further requirements and things that need to be upgraded according to the building code and fire code. Residential, I don't think that there is anything in the residential code that addresses the 50%. And again, with the 50%, I think if you're switching things over to trying to go to the electric heating systems, I think you really need to be, it's about 3/4 of the building to be renovated. That way that you're getting the energy efficiency for the exterior walls and the ceilings so that you're not losing a lot of heat. And then making that heat pump work that much more to kind of keep the temperatures up within the home. So by lowering it, I think it may not get the benefit that you're looking for.
Okay. That's helpful.
Any others? Okay, we got direction?
We do. So we'll prepare a revised local law, have that ready for the packet, understanding that it would be further workshopped at your next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And we have a public hearing set for Monday, the 27th.
Yes.
And the public is invited to come and talk about your opinions on this law. You can get specific, or you can just talk about it generally. I'd love to hear from people about major
I'm
renovations,
sorry.
though.
I thought about it for one more second. Can we say 50% for commercial and 75% for residential
So
to be in compliance with the commercial part of the building code?
I'm just struggling on how we have the expertise to kind of make those judgment calls. I mean, I would rather leave it to Bruce.
Well, the 50%, Bruce just said the 50% threshold is already in the commercial building code. Is that correct, Bruce?
The 50, so you want to do 50% renovation for commercial buildings?
Her question
Right.
is that how it's defined in the
Looking
code?
at that, as it's defined as a level 3 renovation.
The existing building code, which normally addresses, commercial structures and, it addresses the 50% is addressing like upgrades to the, upgrades to the building. A lot of them have to do with like sprinkler systems, especially like a restaurant or an apartment building. Once you exceed that threshold of 50% of your area of work, you actually have to install these systems into the building. But at the same time, it doesn't make you upgrade all the insulation in the building, because the insulation, you may have half the building now becomes insulated, and the other half of the building may be uninsulated. I don't know if that would, again, with the technology that's out there today, I don't know if it would, if it's worth it for them to put in that electric heating system, with half the building going to leak out most of the heated air.
Well, that was the concern Ithaca, I believe, expressed in how they arrived at 75% was sort of the right, finding the right balance. When does it become economically viable and efficient for someone to do so?
Yeah.
And that's how they arrived at 75%.
Okay, yeah, I mean, talking about the Ithaca law tonight, I didn't read it, so I'm going to have to, I'll take a look at it
Okay.
tomorrow. This is something that's been passed already, or?
It has, and I would tell you their definition of.
Bring a large cup of coffee when
Yes.
you read it, is what I've been
It's
told.
very complicated.
Major, definition of major renovation is, you think ours is complicated. Theirs is more complicated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they
But-
do have like a point system to start it
Oh,
out,
my goodness.
leading up into their all-electric buildings,
That's what
so,
the stretch to zero
That's
does
what
too.
they're-
yeah,
Okay.
boggles the mind a little bit.
And that's what, when we started this discussion, one of our directions was to make sure that what we did was able to be understood by the regulated community and implemented by the building department, and that's why we went with sort of a much simpler, straightforward
Yeah.
model. And again, yeah, their definition of major renovation is off the charts.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it is a smarter idea to, I'll have to take a look at it, but maybe it is smart just to adopt something simple now, and then if the stretch to zero comes into play in a year or two from now, once that becomes, once they solidify that program, then maybe adopt that, and then that would just be the upgrade.
I mean, that's sort of in drafting this, Drew and I want to make sure that, right, perfection is not the enemy of good, and that we have the ability to come back and regulate these after you get some experience, and that's why I think NYSERDA offering some technical guidance, they actually would like to be in Beacon if Beacon adopts the law, because you're going to be a good case example. You're going to be actually having real case studies that they can then pass on to other communities and further refining the law. So I wouldn't view this law as being the first and only time you're going to look at this issue, because the state zero emission, right, that we're going there. This is the first step, retrofitting, banning other appliances, those are all down the road, the technology's not there yet. So this is a good first step. It gives you a lot of what we've been discussing. There are more things we can nibble at the edges, but I wouldn't want to see that sort of be a barrier, or someone who's going to do a major renovation decide not to do it because it's 50% versus 75, or you're trying to figure out the age of an appliance. It just detracts from the goal in my mind. And we've got a good law here that you can then implement and tweak it, right? I would ask that in a year from now, you come back and say, okay, here's the effect of the law, and give us a report on it.
Yeah, we could do that. I mean, that would be, once it gets in place, we can kind of feel it out with everybody, because it's very difficult.
Yeah.
It's I did talk to some of the builders and developers. I mean, there's some that, that they're already using all electric technology, because it is efficient. There are people that do prefer that over, over gas. So, even most of the apartment buildings that are going up now, I think are mostly heated and cooled with heat pumps. The new Hiploft building, has all the units across the top of the building. I'm not sure about Edgewater, where they're going over here, but I haven't gotten that far with them. But they're probably doing the same thing, because it seems that the developer there is, kind of energy conscious with things.
Yes.
So I think the ask is for you to take a look at the ethical law, and then
Yep, so
just
we'll
give us any
work with
more
Bruce and
advice.
provide him with that.
I'll take a look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, their lead goal.
Remember, we tried to keep you from looking at it, so
Yeah.
we tried to protect you.
Okay. Drew, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. That was a great discussion. We're going to switch gears, right, Mayor? We're going to move on to leaf blowers. So in the agenda packet, we have a memo from the CAC, which was in response to what the City Council had asked them to look at, kind of the pros and cons into leaf blower legislation and banning gasoline leaf blowers. Currently, leaf blowers are only a little bit regulated in the city's code under the noise chapter. So leaf blower use is prohibited between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m., but you can use leaf blowers between 7 a.m. At 9 p.m., no problem. They're not restricted to the decibel limit because it's pretty much impossible for leaf blowers to comply with decibel limitations. And this is standard language used in all noise ordinances in Dutchess County. In fact, no community in Dutchess County that I was able to find actually went forward and did additional regulations on leaf blowers, let alone any regulations on gasoline-powered leaf blowers. So we are kind of leading the charge in this in Dutchess County, but this type of legislation is not new. So in your packets, I included a chart of some other municipalities that have adopted leaf blower legislation. And as you can see, it really varies from municipality to municipality. I'm actually working on one currently in the village of Rybrook in Westchester County, where they're banning all leaf blowers from May 1st to September. They're not focusing on gasoline-powered leaf blowers, they're focusing on all leaf blowers. And that's unique to Rybrook. But the CAC recommended was starting with gasoline-powered leaf blowers and considering some seasonal limitations. So we have, the next step is to start developing the city's legislation. I guess the first step is, are you interested in moving forward with this type of legislation?
I am.
Right?
So the question I just wanted to ask is are we interested in noise, which I believe we can regulate?
Yes.
And we don't want to say we're interested in greenhouse gas, which we can't regulate.
That's exactly correct.
Okay, so I would be interested in regulating noise.
Yeah, we
Just want to get it on the record.
Yeah. Perfect. Noise is definitely within your municipal home rule authority to adopt leaf blower regulations to address those issues.
Right, and so we'll have to focus on the decibel levels of the equipment as opposed to the source of the power.
Well, for gasoline-powered leaf blower laws, we wouldn't really be focusing on decibel levels so much as you'd be considering timing and you'd be considering seasonal limitations.
In your memo, it says, under its police power, local governments can establish regulations designed to preserve and promote the public health, safety, and general welfare of the community. It doesn't say noise only.
No.
Control dust pollution, eliminate health hazards, and minimize noise pollution. So it's not just noise.
Yes, but we'd put this legislation in the noise code, because that would be the predominant focus for regulating leaf blowers is noise. But there's all these other benefits as well, and it is the public health, safety, and general welfare. But
unless it limits our ability to regulate them. Right, we could move it from noise to another section of the code.
You could. We could do another section of the code. We'd have to think about where it would fit. You wouldn't want to put it under zoning. It's not a zoning issue.
Okay, no, I'm just raising that if noise limits our ability to, noise being the argument limits our ability to regulate, then we're not necessarily beholden to noise as the reason.
We could come up with you could do a leaf blower chapter, but you can put it in noise and still focus on, reducing dust pollution and addressing these other issues. So you're not just limited to, noise. It belongs in noise, but there are other benefits as well to potentially having this type of legislation.
Yeah, these things are dangerous.
So I got confused now. I thought there was an issue with respect to our powers as a municipality to regulate in this area.
Yes, so when we first discussed this type of legislation, the focus was initially on emissions. That is regulated by the Clean Air Act. We cannot regulate leaf blowers in an attempt to control emission levels and the equipment in that respect. Our jurisdiction goes to the general health, safety, and welfare, and we can focus on noise, dust pollution, the spread of, well, I guess that goes with dust, but I've also been reading about the spread of fecal matter, other things that are not regulated by the Clean Air Act with respect to emissions that go with gasoline-powered leaf blowers.
And I think, Lee, to your point, you can also regulate it based upon noise by banning its use completely. So you can say, for example, no outside stereos, no outside speakers. That's not regulated based upon the decibel level. That's banning the use of the outside speakers. Similar to what Drew has explained here, we're regulating the noise by saying that those devices are noisy and create those issues, especially with the motors and the intermittent sounds of turning it on and off, and that therefore it's not a decibel-based function, but it's a noise source regulation, and that is permissible and within your police powers.
That makes sense.
And you think about the reason there are to think about all these other benefits is this type of legislation would be an unlisted action under seeker. So we'd have to go through, a seeker analysis about why this legislation won't have a potential significant environmental impact. So you'd include all those arguments in that as well.
And the main reason we're targeting leaf blowers as opposed to lawn mowers and snow blowers, et cetera, is specifically because of the noise.
Yes,
That's what distinguishes that from all other gas-powered.
And we can use emissions, but those choke engines, those, whatever they're called, 5-stroke engines or whatever.
Well, any kind of 2-stroke engine, a weed whacker or something like that. So it's because of the noise that distinguishes a leaf blower specifically from a weed whacker.
I proposed it because of noise. I proposed it because I heard from 2 residents where the noise was really impacting their health.
Yeah, no, I think we're in agreement. It is the noise primarily. Otherwise, we would be looking to, if it was emissions, we'd be looking to eliminate all 2-stroke engines.
Next year.
Which you can't,
look at that.
what you can't do is steer away from emissions discussion. Noise. This is a noise-driven discussion. It would be noise-driven legislation.
And I think that came to light during the pandemic with more people being at home, especially working from home. And so I'm curious from Bruce, from an enforcement perspective, how would your department deal with that? And maybe we can discuss some of the enforcement provisions in the law.
So, currently the way we enforce the noise law is, unless it happens between 8 and 4 Monday to Friday, there's nobody here from the building department. So most of the time, the calls get put through the police department. The police department goes out, they investigate it. If there's an issue, that they feel necessary to come back to the building department, they notify us. That's usually with businesses. It's usually with restaurants and bars having different issues. With the residential, usually if they're outside the, the 7 to 9 requirement or daytime use, the police just handle it, and it usually doesn't get to us at all. So that's how we've been handling the noise complaints at this point. So the problem comes in is with with this law is, how's it going to get regulated? If it's still regulated under the noise ordinance, the police can still enforce it. If somebody calls the police, they can go and tell them to stop. But it's more or less, I think most of it's going to fall into their lap.
Okay. I hope as a baseline, the council can agree that 7 a.m. is a little early to be operating a leaf blower.
So I guess, Dan, that's a good transition into the first question is, do we want to restrict the times to really cut down the time frame in which people are allowed to use leaf blowers? And that kind of goes hand in hand with, does the city council want to also consider seasonal limitations?
And all of these communities have done seasonal limitations.
Yes,
So-
and some municipalities, as they've gone through, have also updated their hours, so they'll do seasonal limitations, and then when it's season and you can use leaf blowers, well, you can only use it between this smaller window of time.
Okay.
So you can do both, or, you can decide, we'll leave it 7 to 9, but during, May to September, no gasoline-powered leaf blowers at all. There's so many options. We really have to think about what's best for Beacon.
I like the CAC's recommendation. I think getting there in a couple steps is probably the right way to go to kind of, what we would rather see, I think we would all agree, would be people changing their behaviors and purchasing different, safer equipment than being fined and ticketed into doing it. I think we would probably want to, it would give us an opportunity to do some communication around the topic prior to implementing it. But I think my opinion is that, you know, if we had a year where it was seasonal and there were some tighter time restrictions, and then year 2, they're out altogether, or year 3, whatever we agree. I think stepping into it like that is the prudent way to do it.
So, the one that caught my eye was, of course, the one called Sleepy Hollow. And if we're looking at their hours, they had not in the summer, right, October 1st through Memorial Day, only in that period, and then it's at 8 to 5, Saturday and Sunday 9 to 3, Saturday and holidays, Sunday 12 to 2.
I like the idea of weekends and holidays being reduced hours as well. I think that's just a smart way to go in general moving forward.
And do we need Bruce, or can he go home?
Yeah, if you guys don't need me,
Good night.
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm going to invite you to my party.
I wasn't planning on being here.
It's your
for this
birthday.
portion.
Yeah.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Lee.
I forgot about
So,
that.
Happy birthday.
I have Greek-style rice pudding waiting for me at home, so we need to wrap this up, right, at some point.
Well, I'll talk like the Micro Machines guy to get you out of here.
All right, okay.
Good night, Bruce.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Good night, Bruce. Thanks.
Good evening.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yep, welcome.
I like Sleepy Hollow as well, Lee, as a stepping stone towards not having them around. I think anytime where we're saying that something is unhealthy and not good for people, but they can continue to do it for a certain number of hours a day, does seem strange. But if our goal is to not have these things around, I'm for those hours and regulations.
Yeah, I would only say, if we're trying to build our fact pattern, we need to be focused on the noise element of this. And so I'm sure what you meant when you said healthy, you meant high noise level, right?
Now, hold on a second. I'm not allowed to talk about anything but noise?
No, we can talk about, noise is the predominant focus and why we're talking about this law, but you can bring in the other benefits to eliminating leaf blowers. I mean, they all go hand in hand, but
Fact base correctly.
Right.
Also, noise is a health concern.
I understand.
yes.
So I'm just trying to direct the discussion to the right nouns.
Nope, we're good. I think it's clear. Noise is our focus, and then there are these other benefits that the city council is kind of bringing into the discussion. That's
Great.
fair.
In terms of enforcement and penalties, if we are going to have any penalties, I would like that the first time be a warning rather than go straight to penalties.
And I will say that the municipalities we've worked with have done that strategy, and it's actually seemed to work very well. A couple warnings have been issued. Members of the community have been able to kind of discuss, I got a warning, make sure you're listening. So I think that is a good and fair way to go. It kind of helps the transition into this type of legislation.
Mm-hmm. And the penalty, Nick, remind me, so do you remember when we were talking about cannabis and we were talking about smoking in the parks?
Yes.
And we had a conversation about, or was that you, Drew? I don't even remember.
It was Drew.
It was Drew, sorry.
I recall the conversation, but Drew handled the cannabis.
Okay,
yeah.
sorry about that. So we were talking about cannabis, and we were talking about how it was, we had uncovered that smoking was not banned in Beacon's parks, remember? And then we were talking about the fines, and we were like, whatever, and then I think Era Rhodes might have said something like, that's too high, or what, and it turned out that it was, the penalty could be set by the judge, but not to exceed a certain amount.
Yep.
Can we do that here as well?
Yeah, and I'm trying to pull up because I don't have it memorized, which is a huge disappointment, what your current, so this would be placed
It's
under the...
$500
Thank
for
you.
the first offense.
And as Drew was saying, it's up to the discretion of the judge in any event. You
Okay.
can put minimum and the maximum, but ultimately, the judge will determine based upon the circumstances what's the appropriate penalty.
So you could do increment, like the first one could be 250, second one 500, or you could just say, 500, and the judge and the city prosecutor will, they'd make a recommendation. This is the first violation. The city would like to pursue a violation of 250, and the judge can say, no, I'm going to do 100. Actually, my first leaf blower case in the town of Bedford, their maximum was 250. And so we pursued maximum fine. It was the first violation for using the leaf blower in violation of the new law. They received their warning, and we wanted to send a message that this is a very serious law for the town. The judge said, no, we're not going to do that, and set it at 50. So, the judge has that discretion at the end of the day, regardless of what the city prosecutor says.
And with the smoking law, you did set a different violation fee. You wrote, a violation of the provisions of this article shall be subject to a fine of $100 per violation. So that's significantly lower than the noise and significantly lower than our general, which is up to 1,000.
And the other thing with noise that I see very popular, and I would recommend, is that you draft it so that it's very clear that both the property owner and the landscaper can be issued a violation. They should not just be issued to the landscapers, the property owner, and because in some instances the property owner is going to be the one doing the landscaping, but if they have a company come in, they can both be held responsible.
Can you do it so that the worker doesn't get the fine and the company gets the fine? Because sometimes the workers don't have a choice. Like if,
Totally agree with that.
all right.
And then, do you guys want to move to, so this would be all leaf blowers, we're not distinguishing gas and electric? Because it's noise.
Well, that's up to you. A lot of municipalities pursue just gasoline-powered leaf blowers with the idea that the gasoline-powered leaf blowers tend to be louder than an electric leaf blower. But other municipalities, like I was saying, Rybrook is taking a more holistic approach, and they're saying we don't believe there's that much of a difference between electric and gas. All leaf blowers are banned between this time, and that legislation is proposed. It has not been adopted yet. It's fresh in my mind though, because I just had a conference call about it.
I mean, personally, I think this should regulate all leaf blowers. I don't think the people who complain to me are going to be able to distinguish between a gas and an electric leaf blower, personally.
Makes sense. It's about noise.
So we could start off with all and see what the public has to say, maybe workshop it again, see what it looks like.
Well, what do you guys think about in a second or third year moving towards the not having leaf blowers at all in
I'd
Beacon?
like that. I'd like to do the gas-powered leaf blowers now, because I like, not that I want electric leaf blowers, but I like the messaging around not having gas-powered leaf blowers. Even though
Because
we're
they're
not allowed to
noisier.
talk about emissions, and I know that that's not what it's about, I like that we have this type thing, and it's a clear type, like your example. What was your example that you gave earlier? I don't remember, but, we're not using gas-powered leaf blowers.
Right.
I feel like it's an opportunity to say we're not using gas-powered leaf blowers,
So-
even if it's not about emissions.
So you're saying these hours and seasonal would apply to electric, but electric leaf blowers and gas would be banned, gas leaf blowers would be banned altogether, and then eventually electric leaf blowers would also be banned because it's about noise?
Well, the banning of all leaf blowers just for the whole year, I mean, does that impact property maintenance in any way? Is there a replacement
Well,
for all
Typically,
leaf?
it's summer only.
We have to get to the question of, city workers and the question of large properties, but
Right, all those.
Well, the
Yeah.
CAC is implying that electric are much quieter, and they seem to be in support of electric, keeping electric.
So
I like
thought
Sleepy Hollow. I'm going back to the Sleepy Hollow.
just like
That's
the
my
name.
home village.
That was my 2 cents.
That's where I live. It's nice and quiet.
So,
There you go.
my impression looking at at least online, a quick search is, I didn't see a substantial difference. It seemed to vary, that the range of noise on electric and the range of noise on gas-powered overlapped. And that there were less noisy gas-powered that were quieter than some noisier electric. So it would just seem to me that we should just be consistent. So.
I recall seeing that as well.
I guess I'd also like to see what the CAC, because they seem to imply the opposite.
The
That-
opposite being what?
That battery-powered leaf blowers are significantly quieter than gas-powered machines.
If only there were members of the CAC in the audience. I mean,
In general, is it advisable to buy into a battery? And then they're talking about batteries and so on, so
Oh, I don't know.
seems to be their conclusion.
can we invite CAC members to speak, since they're here? To just clarify?
So, I mean, I think we have their view, right? So,
Okay.
unless they're clarifying that view, I saw that view, but I also saw, online in my own research, and I read that what they said, and it was a general statement as opposed to a specific that said, in all cases, an electric is always quieter than a gas. I didn't see that anywhere, right? I would be happy to differentiate.
Say all of them. Same as Joe.
So. Okay.
So, do we have enough to draft the law, or do you have some additional questions?
just two questions,
Yep.
two questions. So I think what I'm hearing is seasonal ban for both electric and gasoline-powered leaf blowers. In the non-seasonal limitation, we'll modify the hours to kind of limit it further on the weekends. Right? This
Sleepy
is-
Hollow's hours.
Sleepy Hollow's hours, we like Sleepy Hollow's hours. I think that
I'd
was.
rather none on Sunday, but.
A warning first when it comes to the penalty. We could stick with the penalty in the noise ordinance currently, which is not to exceed 500. And then the seasonal limit. Does the board have an idea of when they'd like to see that seasonal limit? May 1st, seasonal limit being, no leaf blowers from May 1st to September 30th, or you could do June to October.
I mean, there seems to be a pattern, May to September, October, I think. Perhaps what the Sleepy Hollow October for Lee, did you? I just called you my
Memorial
son's.
Day.
I just called you my son's name.
Memorial
In the
Day,
tone that I
October
use with them too. Is you liked the seasonal limitations in that one?
Yeah, it seemed all right.
Yeah.
Again, I just like the name Sleepy, that's all. But it looked okay.
I like how they just say when it's permitted versus when it's prohibited. It just, I don't know why it's clearer that way. It's easier to hear and understand.
Yeah.
This, just wanted to chime in that the CAC's recommendation, as I recall, was if it was allowed, March through May and October through December. So it's, there are 2 seasons that it's allowed.
I'm inclined to keep things simple and just have one, and have a yes period and a no period, personally.
When there are leaves. Yeah.
Yeah.
At it, so,
Yeah.
we could write it both ways so that for people who find it easier to read it in one way, maybe they'll pick up on it. We could, we'll lay it out. It'll just be a draft initially, and we can go from there. And then my final question, so Lee can get to his birthday desserts. Exemptions. Is the city interested in adding exemption? I would always recommend adding one for storms. We're at, for a 7-day period after a big storm, you allow the use of leaf blowers to speed up the cleanup process. That is a very popular one in almost every municipality that's considered this type of legislation. And I think it has worked well. And then there's other exemptions on top of that for large properties, municipal operations, school districts. Trying to think of some other ones. Golf courses, cemeteries.
So large properties, an exemption for that makes sense to me because it's presumably it's farther away from residential properties, but, you know, are there requirements, state or federal worker requirements that people are wearing noise, not headphones, but like, earmuffs to block out sound and to wear face coverings and eye coverings so that the material's not flying in their face? Because I don't want to exempt certain workers I don't want to permit certain workers to be in danger. But I also understand the challenge of clearing organic debris from a 3-acre property.
I don't know the answer to that, Dan, but I can look into that. My husband was a landscaper, so maybe I'll ask him and ask around and also research the legislation.
All right.
But you said 3 acres. Is that?
Oh no,
I know that was just a number, but that's something. What is a large parcel?
The CAC recommended 1 acre and larger, and recommended storm event exemptions as well. I also do want to note the CAC did call out that gas-powered was much louder than battery, and they did not recommend the battery ban that you now seem to be moving towards. So I would just recommend maybe you all read the CAC memo one more time just to have that fresh in your mind before we make final decisions on this, because we've deviated from that.
Okay.
And Chris, when we talked about this last, you were talking to Mickey, I think, about how the city uses leaf blowers, and it seemed, I can't really remember how they use them.
We use them on Main Street to clean. We use them during paving and milling and paving to get a clean surface. We use them in the parks. So again, I would want the city operations exempted. I had them try battery pack on Main Street, and we tore through all of the batteries that we had very quickly.
Chris, would all city operations be covered by the 1 acre or more exemption? I mean, I guess if you're totaling the full acreage of Main Street.
Yeah, I don't think you would. I think it's by the parcel. So, and on Main Street, for instance, like, we don't have a lot of alternatives you're not running a plug from your house and doing your driveway. You're going down a linear area. Similarly, when we're out doing milling and paving, and they come back after the first milling, and they're getting the debris out so we can put a tack coat down, that wouldn't be covered either by the 1 acre.
Well, I think I have enough to put together a rough draft of this legislation to present to you at the next workshop. And we can go from there and talk about it and see how it's laid out and make any changes that the city council thinks is necessary before moving forward with any type of public hearing.
Okay, and we'll have an opportunity to look at the one comment where we deviated from the CAC.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we can
Well,
take
we
a
can
peek at that too.
look at that. I know this chart was just circulated earlier today, so take a look at, these other municipalities. They're all on E-codes. And if anyone has heard of any municipalities in Dutchess, let me know, because I have not come across any.
That was included in our original packet too, right?
In the
I think so.
in the
A couple
very
months
original
ago,
one
right?
a couple months ago. Yeah, that's right.
That was helpful. Thanks.
I hope this isn't deviating too far, but I think this is within the realm. If we are looking at allowing battery pack, but not allowing like gas powered leaf blowers, would we as a city consider a buyback program? I know that wouldn't necessarily be in the law. That'd be something else that would have to be done. But I saw that in Lewisboro, New York, a year or two ago, their sustainability committee got a NYSERDA Clean Energy Community Grant to do a buyback program. And I was wondering if that was something that we would consider doing as well if we were to implement specifically a gas powered leaf blower ban.
It's definitely an option for the city council, but that'll be a policy decision in your hands. It is an option. I would not write it into the law. Again, it would come, what financing's available to do that type of program. Like in Lewisboro, they got the NYSERDA grant, but, that's a discussion that the city council should continue.
Okay.
And I know the CAC did make that recommendation as well in their memo.
All right, we good?
I'm good.
Getting
Thank you
there.
guys very much.
Thanks.
So we're going to discuss priorities. Please recognize I have a priority. I should have bribed you all and brought some, but anyway.
I know, exactly, Lee.
Thank you.
One of the requirements for, in Greek, it's called rizogalo, which means rice milk. But it requires spending far more time on it than any reasonable human being would spend, because that's what old Greeks did. And it's a very thick, rice. What's the
Pudding?
word in English? Right, rice
Pudding.
Rice
Yeah.
pudding.
In German, it's Milchreis.
Milk rice.
Milk
Yeah.
rice.
And it's you have to boil it so it keeps getting thicker and thicker, right? So anyway,
All right, so as we get into council priorities briefly, I just wanted to kind of first norm on what we're hoping to accomplish with our time today, knowing this does not have to be, and I hope it's actually not our last conversation about our council priorities. I have a point of view on that I'll share, but I want to hear the rest of the council's opinion. So I think probably for today, and in the packet for those who are following along at home or in the audience, and for the council as well as was emailed to you, we can focus on those where the type is council topic. And then our council status, I put as TBD. Basically, either I have questions about it, I'm not sure of dates. We had a conversation last week a little bit about we can't do everything we want, and so there are stuff that we've already committed to, even as council topics, or at least said publicly we have, versus stuff that doesn't really have a date or a time associated with it yet. So I would suggest we focus there and just see how far we get, knowing that we might not get through it all tonight with birthday celebrations and other things we want to do. But I want to first open it up to the council and see if there are other things that people want to make sure they cover tonight, or other approaches that would be helpful for the council as we figure out from this list what our priorities are.
I can start by picking up the conversation from previously, that moving forward in some fashion on the open space plan is a priority for me. From what I understand, there may be some next steps that are short of the full grant that might be an option, but do want to explicitly name it as a priority under climate and environmental priorities, or climate goals. I'm not actually sure what the difference between those two are.
Thanks, Paloma. Yeah, I will say there are things on here. For example, there's lots of stuff that falls under housing. We seem to have lots of different ideas, and what I would propose in terms of our priority is just that we as a council seem to have a lot of energy around that topic, and therefore we think about setting a time that we talk about that. One thing that I also wanted to say for my approach is that I think we should really focus on the first 2 quarters, meaning roughly through the end of June, and try to at least vaguely schedule some things out, or at least talk about when we want to do them, but not try to even schedule out the full year, because we don't know stuff that'll come up. There might be other commitments, things that take longer. So really focusing on that time, knowing that there might be other things that we know are coming up beyond that as well.
Are you proposing like specific meetings for certain topics to
At this point, it's more just to get a general idea of
Okay.
months. I'm not thinking we should actually schedule out literally, like, this workshop will be this and be that. I'm hoping that we can get to that eventually, but tonight it's more, say, for example, of housing. Like I put, we should talk about that in the second quarter. Maybe it can fit into March, but it depends when we're talking about Main Street access recommendations and police reform. If we're doing that in March, then maybe we want to wait for housing until we get into that conversation first. So it's more thinking about things like that, and then what Paloma brought up with the open space plan, that might need a longer discussion to talk about, well, wait a second, what are we trying to accomplish, and is this the year to do it, and get some consensus around that.
And we have Main Street Access coming to present to you next week.
Great.
Excellent, look at that.
Yes.
February, even earlier than I thought. I will make a note of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been in meetings like these, and they can go a really long time. I have two thoughts on prioritization. One, sometimes prioritization is handed to us, right? Like, something is confined by time. And then sometimes prioritization, there might not be any kind of guide for when it should happen, but there may be things outside of our control as we're preparing for the conversation. So I am open to, like, allowing a little flexibility here for the administration to line things up in the order that is possible, right? Because it's about possibility sometimes. But I would say for our conversation, and to keep it short so Lee can go have his tapioca, that we maybe we try to identify the things that are bound by time in some way, or where there's some kind of time restriction.
Sure, yeah, so we've already we can get into the open space, because that seems to have a time element, and maybe dig into that. And let me just take a quick look as I review and see if there are any others.
The community block grant? Oh, no, that's different than I'm thinking of the grant. I'm thinking of our community grant. That's not this.
That's the community investment grant, and we're releasing that RFP probably on March 6th.
Okay. Great.
Great.
So one option would be for us to look at the list and send in up to 3 things and then collate them. Would that work?
So each of us say what are our top 3 things we want to talk about or focus on, and yeah?
I'm just trying to get out the door.
I like that.
The get out the door part or the 3 things?
Both.
Okay.
Can we say 5? Can we just say our top 5 things?
All right, as long as you put them in order. Okay?
Sorry, is this 5 things for the first 2 quarters or 5 things for the entire year?
If you really want to prioritize, 5.
I mean, we know that we're going to be talking about leaf blowers and electrification in March.
Yeah, I would suggest ignore those.
Yeah, so we're really talking about 1 quarter.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, so we should not include in our priorities things that we understand we are already doing?
If you want.
Yes, unless you feel like that might get lost.
Yeah, that's my question. Because we are moving forward on some of my top priorities, which is great. But does that mean that I should not include them in the list?
I think what we agreed was to just not include electrification and leaf blowers, because we are very obviously making progress on those.
Okay.
All right, so I heard okay with up to 5 in order. Okay. Going once,
Yep.
going twice. Good night, all.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you.
Just need a motion to adjourn.
Oh, right, motion to adjourn. Looking for one.
Motion
Second?
to adjourn?
Okay. Dan and Molly, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. I'll teach you how to say happy birthday in Greek if you want.
I'm game.